morning. Good morning. Good to see everyone. I know some others will be coming in. Our storm has moved in. That rain has gotten really heavy. I know I heard Greg heard from Canada just a moment. They said they couldn't even see where they were driving. So they were going real slow trying to get here. So just continue to keep everybody in prayers as they're trying to get here this morning. We're going to be in Exodus 14, Exodus chapter 14. Let's see if I get this thing to work. There we go. We're going to be where God divides the Red Sea. We're finally getting to the Red Sea. It's so great to see that where they will cross the Red Sea and get to the other side today. And so before we get into that, let's go ahead and look at some of our questions, remind us where we are at. Go back to Job. Which of the following did Job not do when he learned the bad news of his possessions and children? A, tore his clothes, B, fell to the ground and worshiped, or C, sinned? Sin. He did not sin. We see that. That's exactly right. Which brings us to our next point. All right, here we go. Come on. Let's turn. There we go. When the ark quit floating, where did it land? Where did it rest? Genesis 8:4. Mountains of Ararat. Exactly right. I like how God says that, the mountains, so we don't know exactly which mountain, even though they believe they found it. But I mean, it's really good to see that. Next one. Discuss what happened to the dove. On each of the 3 occasions, Noah sent it out. So there's 2 things really to know: what the dove did and how long in between after the first one did Noah wait for each one. So who can answer that?
He went out the first time, and he didn't have a place to put his feet on, or his soles of his feet on this earth. So he flew back, came back to Noah. He took him and waited 7 days, and went back out again, and came back to the olive grove that time. So we waited another 7 and sent him back out, and he never came back.
That's exactly right. I mean, just like reading right from the Bible. That's exactly right, Greg. Good job. So we see that's exactly how we see that happen. It's just a moment shows as it goes, and people will be like, why do you wait 7 days? Well, you're waiting for the water to go down. Continually waiting, as we see here. Plus 7 is the perfect number. It's a whole week, really, is the way you look at it. You waited a week. So let's go to the next one. Moses, Exodus 10, dealing with the plagues. What did God tell Moses that the Israelites would tell their sons and grandsons? 10 verse 2. Basically something that they would never forget.
Oh, the Passover.
They would never forget the Passover, and that, of course, that they basically also understand that they were brought out of Egypt. You know, they would never quit talking about how they were brought out of Egypt during this time. Which brings us to the next one, Exodus 11 and 12. At the time of the last plague, what were the feelings of the Egyptians, number 1, towards Moses? Notice what it says, at the time of the last plague. So remember, what was the last plague? Death of the firstborn. How were the Egyptians towards Moses? They feared him greatly. They really did. Yes, exactly. Because they looked at him and they said, this man, he could do anything basically. And they saw that and it makes sense. They were really fearing God, even though they said Moses, because Moses was using. Which brings us to the next point: the Egyptians toward the Israelite people. Well, how did the Egyptians feel towards them? Y'all be inside with me today. So, well, anybody got that? So how did the Egyptians feel towards the Israelite people? They wanted them to leave. Remember, it also said they respected them, which was kind of interesting. What that meant was because of just everything God said that would happen and move forward with it. They gave them everything they could. Well, that was part of it too. They didn't want them there anymore. Exactly right. With all the places there. And then how did the Israelite people towards Moses? Exodus 11:3. Might be a trick question there. Does it say it? Yeah. It actually doesn't say anything about how the Israelites people felt towards Moses. But we do know, though, at this point, when we get to the end of the plagues, they're respecting him too. They're ready. They're ready to leave, and they followed and do exactly what Moses said that came from God for them to do with their doors. Yes. They sure did with the blood, and we see that definitely. Which brings us to the next point. Come on, there we go. The blood put on the top and sides of the door frames of the Israelite homes came from the what?
Sacrifice.
The sacrifice could have been one of 2 things. What could it have been? A lamb or a goat. Exactly right. We see that. So the next one, on the night God passed over the land of Egypt, striking the firstborn dead, how long were the Israelites required to remain inside their house? Till morning, exactly right, till daylight basically, till that morning time. And they all did that as we see that happening. We go through. I just heard from Sil, she had to turn around and go back home because the rain was so bad. So just continue to keep her in your prayers too. She's already home. The next one is the land of Canaan was described as a land flowing with milk and honey. What a place to be. All right, next one, Exodus 13:19. Whose bones did Moses and the Israelites take with them? Joseph, exactly right. And we see that happening, which breaks us down. Yeah, go ahead.
On those questions, one that I'm glad that was worded the way it was about God passing over, because so many times you hear people say the death angel.
Yeah,
And I believe that was in the movie that with Charlton Heston.
It was.
He said in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, exactly. And see, God makes it very clear, and more than likely what we see the same thing with Jesus. You know, we see leading them out with the, of course, with the cloud and then with the fire. It says the angel of the Lord, which we know that's Jesus. And more than likely that was the same thing when it comes to that passing over them. And remember, God would know, of course, Jesus, God too, would know exactly each person, you know, as we see here and understand what's going on as we deal with that. Which brings us down to Exodus 14. So we're going to deal with God dividing the Red Seas. Here we'll find ourselves, you know, in chapter 14 of the book of Exodus. And God has worked, you know, some amazing miracles so far on behalf of the Israelites, on behalf of getting them out as people. And they've been, you know, now they've been delivered completely out of Egypt. They're no longer in Egypt's border, we would say. However, they are not safe yet, and we need to understand that. So, we look at this for the most part, which is a good thing. The Israelites have recognized who God is. They've recognized that Moses is being used by God to get this done, and they're happy about it. But because they were now free to worship Him, and they chose to do so, but it didn't mean they wouldn't be having any tough times. You know, during these 40 years, they're going to have a lot of rough times. And at that point, they didn't know it was going to be 40 years. They're going to have some difficult days, but that's kind of how life is, we know when we look at it. We know that life isn't about avoiding the trials of life. It's just, it just can't be done. It's more about how we handle the trials of life. And that's what we see here with them. We don't have to, you know, let life basically kick us around, which it tries to quite often. But we can make sure that the trials, you know, don't steal our joy, our peace, our victory. Because if we're a Christian and we're in Christ, we have that victory. We can have that joy. We can have that peace, as we see. And these Israelites, they're feeling that right now. But in just a moment, they're gonna go away from that. They're gonna stop depending on God again, and they're gonna depend on themselves and what they feel they need to do. Which brings us to this point here, knowing that, there we go, that God's going to use Pharaoh. He's going to use Pharaoh to display His power, and that everybody will be able to see it. Not only the Egyptians, not only, very importantly, the Israelites to, you know, confirm their faith, make them stronger, but also the entire world. We're going to learn about this. So let's go and begin reading. We'll read Exodus 14, 1 through 4, please.
Now the Lord spake to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, that they turn and camp before Python, before Megadon, and the sea opposite Baal-Zan. And you shall camp before it by the sea. Then for Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land, and the wilderness has closed them in. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart, so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh, over all his army, and the Egyptians may know that I am Lord, and they shall do so. Thank you.
So remember, what he means by bewildered, of course, that they're confused. You know, he thinks they're confused because remember, when they left Egypt, they could have, to get to Canaan, they could have just done what? They could have gone straight across. You just go right along the Mediterranean Sea, right up, about a month to get there. Especially with that many, could have been longer. But God knew they couldn't do that because of the fighting. You know, they would look like a massive army coming in, and others want to fight them. And they, you know, they're being called an army at this point, and they actually lined up like an army. They are not a fighting army yet. And so we see all this happening. And so we see that they're going to move through this map. So instead, this is what they do. I showed this Wednesday night. They go into this area here. They're going to be coming down. And this is where we see Migdal, where it talks about they'll swing round it. And Etham, day 16, we already talked about that. So now they're over here. They're here at chapter, for basically 17th day through the 25th day. They're going to stay here right next to the Red Sea. And that's where they'll be crossing in a moment. So at the very beginning, you know, God is doing things that He ultimately can show his power, show his strength, and wants others to see it. And he alters the course, as we said. He alters the course of the Jews to go this direction. And what it does, when Pharaoh finds out about it, Pharaoh basically thinks they're lost. Because you start getting into these wadis, into these old river beds and so on, and we're going to learn there's only one way in and one way out, because it's straight up the cliffs. And you remember, if you were here back when I did Hebrews chapter 11, I had a lot more time then, and when we talked about this, I actually did a video where we were driving through it, walking through all the wadis, all the area around it, and it brought us out to the big beach that is there on the coast of the Red Sea, which they could definitely fit 2 million people at. Only place on the entire coast there where you could fit that many people. That's what shows you how important God is and how great and how he guides his people. Because we're going to see in a minute, there's different wadis they could have took. How did they know to take the right one, to go the right way? Because God was leading them. Dad, go ahead.
I was trying to remember and seeing this drawing. Do you have any remembrance, or is there a recording what the distance is from the last camp over when they wound up into the wilderness? What that distance was is it 10 miles wide?
Oh, you mean across the water?
Yeah,
or
across
you mean,
the water.
Oh, you can see it. It probably looks like it's less than a mile.
Oh, okay.
It's even that, if even that long. And we'll look at that in a moment. I have a picture of where you're standing on the coast and you see the other side. Although sometimes that perception, is a little, I never thought about measuring it, but the perception is it may be farther than it looks, or it may not be as far. You just look to those. But I will say this, the other great amazing thing, it was the lowest spot on the entire Red Sea. The lowest spot to cross. I don't think that means, they didn't have to buy it. They could have walked in 10 foot of water, no, and they could have walked, nobody did. No, it's hundreds of feet deep, hundreds of feet, but not thousands. And so that's what we see once again, God using, everything showing this had to be God. Moses wasn't an oceanographer. He didn't know how to figure those things out. He wasn't a man with, I guess you'd say, directional. Knew that, even though they said, hey, he wandered in the desert for years with the sheep, but he didn't go to here, to this spot. He's already in Saudi Arabia, where he was at with his father-in-law, that we would call Saudi Arabia today. So let's go ahead and continue here. We see here that Pharaoh, of course, the officials were keeping an eye. We see they were keeping a close eye on him, on what needed to be done, all these Israelites, and they thought, this is it. This is our opportunity to catch them. They're camping. They're camping here on the side of the coast. We're going to get to them. We're going to kill them all. So think about, we see this, the people have finally come to the conclusion, we want them back. I mean, these pyramids aren't going to build themselves, right? I mean, they want them back. They want this to finish. And, even though we see the incredible amounts of pain that we see here that Egypt going through, we're going to understand in just a moment. We're going to see here as we get ready to read this, or we just read it, that the Jews are going to kind of forget where they're at, what they're doing, what they're supposed to be doing. So let's go ahead and read this. We have read it, verses 5 through 9. If someone read that for us, please.
Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also he took 600 choice chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened their heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses, chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his army, and overtook them, camping by the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Appreciate that, brother. So as we look at this here, I'll go back to the picture 1 second, just so y'all see. Here's where Zephron is. It's actually on the other side of the water. Over here, but they don't have a name for this spot back then, so that's how they gave an idea of the name. And I think it's interesting because it's, we say, well, what happened? Remember, Moses wrote this after all these events, and he knew where these places were. Of course, he's being inspired by God to write these events down, and we see that. So once again, they think they have them, they think they caught them, they have scouts looking at them, massive, massive army coming towards them as we look to this. But remember also, once again, this verse 8, let me go back to it here, verse 8 where it says, and he pursued the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with boldness. Very important to understand. They weren't going out as timid, scared people. They were ready. I mean, they remember when he said get ready for the, to leave, you're supposed to be completely prepared, completely dressed, shoes on, belts tight, ready to move. And they were ready to do this. So as we look at this, the strongest influence upon Pharaoh in this is God hardening his heart. Very important to catch that. Some will say, oh, God didn't do anything. No, it says very clearly that God hardened his heart. But remember, as we see that twice in there. But remember, Pharaoh had many, many opportunities on his own to change everything, didn't he? He could have easily said, I'll let your people go after the first plague. Could have done it the second plague, after the third plague, all the way, to the ninth plague, we would say. But once you got to the 10th, it was too late. It was going to happen. And so we look at this and see this, that he decided on his own also several times to harden his heart. And God knew the pride that was there. What it says it means by hardened heart, it doesn't mean God reached in and said, I'm going to make your heart hard so you won't let these people go. What he was doing is there were things that were happening that, Pharaoh took too much pride in them, and God doing those events is what caused that hardening. And that's what we see here during this moment. So Pharaoh assembled his best soldiers, readied them, as we would say, basically, for this battle. They pursued the Jews, caught up to where they were camped very quickly, which makes sense because how big they are. Now, I want you to think about this. When you start going through these wadis, even we would see with the Egyptians, they would have to really narrow down because of how many people they had in this army that was going there. Some would say, well, that would give the Jews time to figure out what to do. Nope, not at all. Because they don't know what to do. They're stuck, they feel like. And they're going to actually be mad at Moses in just a moment. And it's a terrible event to see how they change so quickly. Because God never told them, I'm going to get you across the Red Sea. But God told them, I will deliver you from Egypt and get you to the land of Canaan. I mean, very, very clear. And they're nowhere close to the land of Canaan yet. So they should be relying on it. Mom, go ahead.
What is a wadi?
A wadi is basically is an old riverbed where rivers gone through creeks, different things. The water rushes down off the mountains into it, and it turns into a waterway, basically, the best way to put it. And what's that?
It's rocky.
It's very rocky, very rocky. It's not, and what happens is it dries up, so it's not like it's just a trail. But the one we're looking at, they have over time, they've graded it into like a road, because there are some type of not university, but something the university uses over there that we see on that area of that island now. You actually see them in the pictures in a moment. So here we look at this. Israel basically at this point, come on, turn. Israel is going to forget about God's power. And the reason to forget about God's power is kind of like this picture, what you would think. I mean, a lot of times we don't think about it. A lot of times people think, oh, it's just the chariots. No, it was more than just chariots, because it said there's armies, and it says they were marched in. And so there were many, there were 600 of the best chariots. And then he says, and all the other chariots of Egypt. And I have some of my notes, I think, but basically what most scholars figure up here and think that it could have been close to, with knowing how big Egypt was, 20,000 chariots. 20,000 chariots. We don't know that for sure, but that's what most come up to, which brings us to Exodus 14, verses 10 through 12. If someone would like to read that, please.
And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were very afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, you have taken us away to die in the wilderness. Why have you so dealt with us to bring us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to have served the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness.
Thank you. So their trust in God has done what?
It's gone.
It's gone. It just disappeared. Can you believe just how quickly? I mean, how quickly the Jews turned on Moses when things got different and when things got difficult. Excuse me. And we see this. They're not just. Of course, they're not saying they're mad at God, but by being mad at Moses, you're what? You're mad at God, because Moses is only doing what God said to do. And this is, remember, this is exactly how they were right from the beginning. Remember when they went in to Pharaoh and they found out that it was Moses and Aaron, that they were, all these problems were happening, that their work become harder. In fact, let's go and read it, what it says. It reminds me all the way back to Exodus 5. This was the first time, and then after this, we see the plagues, their faith becomes strong, very strong. And you would think they would still continue to be strong, but they're not. And we get to this side when they see Pharaoh and all of his armies. So I'm going to read this for us, please.
Then as they came out from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. And they said to them, "Let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of the servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us."
Thank you. So we see here where they were upset here in the beginning, and then of course now at the end again. And in those verses we read, not these ones, but the ones right before that, Exodus 14, said that there are basically no cemeteries, no graveyards, meaning that nothing was marked, where they were buried. I mean, they could have been buried in mass graves. We don't know. But they're like, there's none of that. There's none of that for us. You're not going to say, well, why would we want to die in the wilderness? Which is, to me, it's kind of crazy. Why not try to, get out of there? And if you die doing it, well, you did what God said. But that's not where they're at. So the Jews seem fine as long as their lifestyles weren't affected. That's really what it comes down to. But when things got hard and dangerous, out came the whiners, is really what you see. Let me ask this. Did Moses say it was going to be easy? Did he ever say that God said it'll be easy getting to the land of Canaan? He never said that. In fact, they should be used to the hardness, what's going on with the way they've been treated and what they're going through. Anything had to be better, but that's not how they're seeing it. Think about it, they're hungry. They're eating what they had, but I'm sure they're hungry for other stuff. We're going to see that later. They're thirsty. I don't know how long the water's. We know it's going to last them right now. Of course, we're going to see God start supplying the water and different things here. But here we see that they feel they're about to fall prey to Egypt, and they don't want that to happen because they feel they're not just going to take them back, that they're actually going to kill them all there, which would make no sense at all. That would make no sense. If Pharaoh caught them, I guarantee he's going to kill who? Moses and Aaron, without a doubt. They're both dead, and probably maybe their immediate family. But the rest of the Jews, what would a Pharaoh probably done with them? Taken them back and made them back in servitude, what we see happening. So here, once again, the Jews see the army in hot pursuit, and immediately started worrying, complaining. The people found themselves seemingly incapable of the situation. And as we see this, but once again, haven't they seen a lot of power of God over the last month? They've seen a lot. Actually, it's been almost 2 months now, because they're going to be here day 25 to the Red Sea. And so they've seen all this great power that's around. They found things that they couldn't explain that God was doing. And so you think they would trust in Him and not want to turn back as we see this happening. But what is interesting, that what they needed to do was attend, to not look back at their enemies, but look ahead. Look to God. Look forward. Look to that, that pillar of fire during the night, and that cloud during the day that didn't only preserve them, but guided them, but kept them safe and not burning up, tired and hot. And we see that all going with them, because they know only with God is how they're going to win the battle. It's not going to be any other way. So as we see this moving forward, God is now going to display His power. He's going to display His power by basically by fighting for Israel. And that's really what we see here, that God will fight for Israel. And He's going to first do it by making a division, dividing once again. Because remember, the Egyptians could come in there real quick, but God's not going to allow that. And amazingly, God didn't bring like a big avalanche or anything, which He could have, because the way the mountains were right there, He could have done anything He wanted to, destroyed them like that. He didn't. He's going to hold them off with the cloud. And it's pure darkness, even though we know on the other side we see the light, because that's for Israel. But I've got a picture here that I kind of believe was kind of what you would think. They'd probably see some of the fire from it, but it would look pitch black around them again. And remember, has Egypt already felt that blackness once before? That they did in Egypt. Now this isn't going to be as bad, because it said it never happened like that again. At least it said in Egypt, which is kind of interesting here. But whatever God is doing, because someone say, how does a cloud keep people back? Well, if you can't see, you're probably not going to go anywhere. And so that's what we see happening here. So as we look at this, we find Exodus 14, 13 through 14. If someone going to read this for us, what we see taking place.
And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and sing the salvation of the Lord, which He will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no fight for you, and you shall hold your peace.
Imagine that. Yeah, I mean, Moses, look at the confidence in Moses. Moses didn't go and say, okay, I'll talk to God, I'll try to figure this out. He doesn't do it. He immediately says, those enemies you see today's going to be it. You're never going to see them again after this day. It'll be done. You're not going to have to worry about it anymore. And that's why he says, the Lord will fight for you. Hold your peace. Be calm, be confident. And the same is with us today that we see. So, there are battles that we have no business entering into, ever. I'll just tell you that right now. There are some battles we don't, but the Lord will fight for us. And that's what we see here. And that's what we see through the time of the Bible, the whole thing. There are battles that we simply cannot win. Is there any battle that God can't win? No, there's no battle whatsoever we can't win, because number one, God sees the outcome of everything. He knows exactly what's going to happen, what's going to take place, and He can protect us, and we see that. And that doesn't mean physically we'll always be protected, because I guarantee you, these Israelites, there's a lot of Israelites that deal with a lot during this time, dying and so on, and we have this, but God wants us to ultimately understand that spiritually is the most important part of our life, but it doesn't mean He won't take care of us too while we're here. But we see that. So the Lord's going to fight for them. The Lord will fight for you and I. And we next see the Lord giving Moses some instructions. He's going to tell him how it's going to play out. And He's going to reiterate the purpose of the coming events, of what's taking place here. Think about this we just read there. Let me jump into it. Moses commanded the people, number one, to do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. This comes from God. That would be control your emotions by walking in faith, not by sight. This is so important. We know this. We read it in Hebrews 11, other areas of the Bible, and all they're doing is seeing that big army. He says, don't look to that. Turn around. Look to God. Stay calm. Do not be afraid of these people. He also states, stand still. Now, this word stand still is not a command to do nothing. Because someone say, oh, so I'm just going to stand here and not do anything. That's not what it means. He says, but rather take a stand. As we find here, station yourself in this moment of what's happening here. And God gives the command to them not just to stay there, but the command to go forward. And now think about this. Once again, the water hasn't parted yet. He's already told them they're going to go forward. And all they see is what? Water. And so they more likely see themselves doing what if they go in there? Drowning, dying. I mean, what a horrible way to die as we think about that. But he says, as you go forward, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see the salvation of the Lord. He made that very clear. He goes, you're going to see that unaided by anyone, God would save His people on His own. He would take care of this. He doesn't ask them to fight or anything. Just stand still. That's what He means. Stand there, stand your ground, be ready to move forward, and it's going to happen. And then He said, because of that, it'll be this. The Egyptians whom you see today, you'll see again no more. And here it is, forever. I want you to think, we're going to see in a moment, when the water comes back down, how many Egyptians probably died on that day. I mean, thousands, had to have been, thousands and thousands. And the majority of all of them, they weren't the women and the children, they were the who? They were the fighting men, and we know Israel would usually fight there when you get your late 20s and above, you would see that, and here probably even younger with Egypt, because usually the country really don't care about that. If you can fight, you can fight. That's where they took you. So when they looked, they could see a lot of Egyptians, and Moses indicated, of course, the great confidence in God, willingness to fight for them. And He tells them to quit whining, basically, when He says, hold your peace. Hold your peace. Stop doing what you're doing. Which brings us to verse 15. If someone read that for us right here where He says it.
And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward.
So here, we need to understand, God isn't telling Moses He's doing this, but He's basically saying the whole, everybody, why are they crying? Well, what's going on here? And it also tells us that Moses wasn't just keeping to himself, he must have been continually talking to God. And we see this happen. So he says, tell the children of Israel to go forward. To go where? Once again, we said toward the sea. The call was for the people to move toward the seemingly unsurmountable obstacle. To me, your thought would be, if you don't have a boat, you may have a better chance fighting who, at least, than going to the sea, right? You may have too many people. You might have a better chance fighting the Egyptians. Who knows? No, that's not what God wants, and that's not what's going to happen here. Which brings us to verse 16. If someone read this, God gives them the direction of what to do.
But lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea.
Thank you. Can you imagine hearing that from God? Moses has done some remarkable things, that God's told him to do this and this, but a lot of times the staff has been involved right in his hand, and that's really for a motion of showing that you see who's doing this, you know, we understand that, and so Moses is going to do this, and you're going to divide the sea, really? You're going to divide it as we see this, but Moses obeys God immediately, and the Israelites are going to cross over dry land, without a doubt, hundreds of feet deep, but they're going to get through it, and this is what it says, beginning in verse 17 through 18, if someone read that, please.
And I indeed will harden the heart of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And so I will again honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen.
Thank you. So here what God says, you know, I'm going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians, not just Pharaoh. Meaning what they're watching, meaning they're all ready to go in there and take care of business. And it's because of what's happening and what has happened to them. So here Jesus, now the angel of the Lord, is going to keep Israel safe. And this is what we're going to find with this light and with this cloud, verses 19 through 20. And let's go ahead and read and see what it says here. If someone read that for us, please.
And the angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud went before them, stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that one did not come near the other all the night.
Thank you. So here it is, you know, the pillar of cloud now becomes a protective force. You know, it's been guiding them. That's what we're doing. And then also the cloud, you know, to kind of protect themselves from the sun, gives that. But now it's an actually a protecting force, keeping the Pharaoh and his Egyptians from overtaking the Jews we see here. God went from a guide to now a guardian. I mean, he is guarding his children, his people. And you know, you would think if God does this, what he's about to do, that the rest of your life, you would never lose your faith in God, right? I mean, there would be strong. But brethren, when people are put in horrible, terrible, bad situations, things happen. You know, and the fleshly side takes control. And that's what we see happening in a little bit later down the road through this. So the presence of God was one thing to the world, quite another to the people, and the distinction was no doubt a great comfort to Israel. As we see here, you know, the truth that it talks about there, and we know John 10:17, you know, we will be sanctified by the truth. And that's what we're seeing here. They're going to be sanctified by this moment of what happens. And I want to show you a few things real quick, a couple pictures. And this is what I was getting at earlier that I showed back when I did Hebrews 11 a couple years ago. So they're coming through this direction here. Now they could have came here, they could have turned down one of these wadis thinking that was right. They could have came here as they're walking all through this and gone back this direction. But no, they turn and they go this way. And you know, God is guiding them. And this is where they end up. I want y'all to look at this coast. This is where they end up. The only place you could actually find. And here's what a wadi looks like. That you'd see here and you'd be going down through this and you see there's the land right there. There's the other side where Saudi Arabia would be. And there's where they come out to. Look at that. This is from Google. Now think about that for just a moment. There is easily, as you start looking at this, what we see here, that 2 million people, I'll show you another picture in a moment, can easily fit in this spot. The only place, and this is what's amazing, they're not, you would think they would, a lot of them would be back up in the wadi. If they're up in the wadi, they don't get to see what? They don't get to see the water. They don't get to see the miracle of what's happening. They're all on this land. They're all in this area here. And I said it would definitely actually hold more than 2 million people as we see this here. So this is what Josephus wrote. Remember, he's a Jewish historian. And he said, for there was on each side a ridge of mountains. So that's on both sides. They couldn't go any way. That terminated at the sea. So the mountains come all the way to the sea and just stop. And that's what we see there, which were impassable by reason their roughness and obstructed their flight. So here's what it looks like when you look at this direction. You can really tell where they come out through here and how great and massive this is. It's going to be over in this direction where they're actually going to cross. And when they cross, I've said this before, it's interesting because God is there by fire. You know, he's there at night. They've been there from 17th day to 25th day, which is right now day 25. And they have found I don't know if I told you before, I think I have. They found this on the seashore there on the water right there where the sand has actually crystallized. And they said the only way for that to happen, it has to be massive, massive heat from a fire. Wow. And they're saying, well, we can't explain it. I can explain it. I mean, the Bible is really clear about God and the fire and what he was doing there. What we find with it. We see if I have another picture. There's looking across. So it may be, I mean, it may be a mile, mile and a half, maybe two, somewhere in there.
One person said, I was just looking it up a little bit ago, 11 miles.
That don't look like 11 miles. That person don't know how to read. No. I mean, it could be, like I said, it's very distracting, but when you look at it from top, you look down too, you go, I don't know if that, but it's not far, but it is far enough, what I'm saying, for the Israel to be caught, be caught by the Egyptians. And they're actually going to, remember, God's going to actually allow them to get all the way across, is what we're going to see. Appreciate you looking at it. Someone, they probably measured, it probably is close to 11 miles. It don't look that far, but I'm sure it is. So here's the next one. Let's go ahead and move out of this. Israel's going to walk on dry land into the Red Sea. I got 3 minutes. Let me go ahead and read this real quick. It says, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land. So it wasn't like, it was like, whoop. It was like, whoop, it's done, and go across. They are watching this. They are watching this, and watching this, and watching this water, and what it's doing is probably, they said that east wind, so it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We see this one other time with water. Where do we see that at? At the Jordan River. The difference with it was it wasn't divided, it was actually stopped. I mean, it was stopped way up about a mile and a half, 2 miles north of them. So here we have this happening. It says, made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry land, into the waters were the wall to them, their right hand, and on their left, a wall of water. Think about that. And if you're talking hundreds of feet deep, I mean, hundreds of feet of water. I mean, when you're walking through there, all you're probably thinking is, oh, if it just starts leaking, we're done. It just starts coming out. But we see this happening. So he continues. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea, the dry ground, the waters were on the wall on the right and left. And the Egyptians pursued them and went after them into the midst of the sea. All Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Every single one of them. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of the fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians, troubled them. Something was happening, something was going on, and it says, and he took off their chariot wheels, so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. I love that statement. They make it very clear the Lord fights for them, and that's exactly what God told Moses would be done, which brings it down to this, the next slide. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, over the waters, that come back upon the Egyptians, and on their chariots and on their horsemen. And then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and when the morning appeared, the sea returned to its full depth, while the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So, I mean, they were trying to get back across. It says, so the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. Not so much as one of them remained. What does that mean? Not one of them remained. They all died. Every single one of them. Can you imagine? I would think, first of all, you need to be scared probably about how cool that would be. To watch that water and to see all that there and the excitement that was going in, but also probably screaming. I mean, it's just, try to imagine trying to keep a child calm, and especially if this was scary as we would see that. So for the Jews that were all safe on the shore side, God did this, the water collapsed upon the Egyptians. There were no doubt that the Jews, as we see here, they were getting across the Egyptians, doing everything to try to get back home, and it killed every one of them. They didn't have a chance to go through it, which I'm out of time, but I just want to show you these pictures real quick. I did this in Hebrews 1 also. This is actually found on the bottom of the sea. They're exactly where the crossing was at. Chariot wheels fixed to axles standing straight up on the seabed of the Red Sea. You're probably like, how for sure do we know that? There was an oceanographer that was searching for gold. He was searching for the gold of the chariots because he believed this moment. And this is what he was at, some type of radar thing, a system that could actually show a sonogram or something, the way it was done, that he could actually see inside and what these are. And it's really remarkable to think that. And the next one is this right here, about the photo of the gilded chariot wheel that remains on the sea. Exactly. There's this one that they find in the Egyptian drawings. In Egypt, they had, at that time, they had 4, 6, and 8-spoke wheels. And they're all found there in the sea. Every single one of them there. And the only time they were used, as it says, these styles were during the 18th dynasty, or about 1446 BC when the Exodus took place. I want you to think about that. And finally, bones of humans. They found these on the bottom. They said they basically mineralized, as we see having what I brought it right down on there, what's on them. Coral, basically, and different things. It's calcified, but they have proven that this was from a man. They found horse bones also, and they stated that this would come back about 3,500 years ago to the age what they figured them to be. And then finally, the column. I got to show this before I close. Here's a column. This is on Saudi Arabia side. Let me just read you what it says. The column matches one on the other side of the Gulf in Saudi Arabia, which had the inscription intact. The Hebrew words Mizraim, meaning Egypt. And then after that, it said death, water, Pharaoh, Edom, Yahweh, and Solomon were on the column. King Solomon had these columns erected 400 years after the miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea on dry land. Solomon's seaport was at the northern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba at the Elite, which 1 Kings 9:26 tells us. And he was very familiar with Red Sea crossing as it was in his neighborhood. The Bible even mentions this column. Isaiah chapter 19:19 actually talks about it. It says, that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord as its border. And we have verses 29-31. You go and read those. It basically tells us that they were saved, they got across, and everything was good. Any comments or questions before I close? I know I did that really quick right there at the end. All right, everybody else? All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.